Number 5 on this list is John Titor. John is one of the most well-known time travelers and one of the most concrete stories that we have that the practice could be possible. Bustle says, in a thread begun in the fall of 2000 about time travel paradoxes on the online forum, the Time Travel Institute, now known as Curious Cosmos, a user responded to a comment about how a time machine could theoretically be built with the following message. Wow, Paul is right on the money. I was just about to give up hope on anyone knowing who Tipler or Kerr was on this word line. By the way, number 2 is the correct answer, and the basics for time travel start at CERN in about a year and end in 2034 with the first time machine built by GE. Too bad we can't post pictures or I'd show it to you. Now the implication, of course, of this message was that the user, who was going by the name timetravel_0, came from a point in the future during which such a machine had already been invented. Over the course of many messages spanning from that first thread all the way through the early spring of 2001, the user, who became known as John Titor, told his story. He said that he had been sent back to 1975 in order to bring an IBM 5100 computer to his own time. He was just stopping in 2000 for a brief rest on his way back home. The computer, he said, was needed to debug various legacy computer problems in 2036 in order to combat a known problem similar to Y2K called the year 2038 problem. John didn't refer to it as such, but he said that Unix was going to have an issue in 2038, which is what we thought was going to happen back when the calendar took over from 1999 to 2000. Opinions are divided on whether John Titor was real. Some folks think he was the only real example of time travel we've ever seen, while others think it's one of the most enduring hoaxes we've ever seen. I feel like this definitely could be a hoax considering we never actually saw John in person. Granted, if he truly is a time traveler, then he would have probably been told not to see people in person cause it would alter the future in ways that we might not know. I don't know, definitely a weird one here, folks. Let me know in the comments down below what you got, hoax or reality. Number 4 on this list is Barack Obama. Yeah, I know folks, this one's a little weird. Now I want to come out and say that Obama himself doesn't claim that he's done this. There is a few people who believe that he has though. Bustle says Andrew D. Basiago and William Stillings stepped forward claiming that they were former chrononauts who had worked with an alleged DARPA program called Project Pegasus. Project Pegasus, they said, had been developed in the 1970s. In 1980 they were taking a Mars training class at a community college in California, the college presumably functioning as a cover for the alleged program, when they were picked to go to Mars. The mode of transport? Teleportation. It gets better too. Basiago and Stillings also said that the then 19-year-old Barack Obama, whom they claimed was going by the name Barry Soetoro at the time, was also one of the students chosen to go to Mars. They said the teleportation occurred via something called a jump room. The White House has denied that Obama has ever been to Mars. Only if you count watching Marvin the Martian, Tommy Vietor, then the spokesperson from the National Security Council told Wired's Danger Room in 2012. So if this is true, then Obama may have been to Mars by form of time traveling? It's pretty wild and out there, and let's face it, most likely not true. But let's just go down the rabbit hole that this could be true. Imagine if the former US president has literally been time traveling this whole time and been into the future. I feel like there is a solid movie premise right there. Some production company has got to pick that one up.
Number 3. Anne Moberly and Elle Jourdain. In 1901, two friends and collegiates, Anne Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, were both teachers at St. Hugh's College in Oxford who were traveling through France on a vacation. Their primary destination was the Palace of Versailles, the former center of political power in France until the Revolution. What was supposed to be a walk through the annals of history became far more literal than either of the women would expect. Taking a promenade through the Petit Trianon, the two claimed to have found themselves walking through the 17th century, surrounded by people in period attire. going about their day as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Jourdain claimed that it was as if they'd seemed they were walking through a painting, that it felt as if they were in a living tableau. As they walked through, confused and disoriented, they came forward to a woman sketching in the park who they assumed to be another tourist who they later claimed was Marie Antoinette, the last queen of France. Shortly after, the pair found themselves back in the palace as if nothing had happened. They had returned and visited Petit Trianon several times, hoping to reignite whatever had occurred. When they returned to Oxford, they produced two separate personal accounts of what had occurred, desperate for answers. In 1911, the two produced a book called An Adventure, under pen names for fear their academic status would be threatened. The two never found answers for what happened to them and were often ridiculed for their belief, their claims being dismissed as a shared delusion, a folie à deux, or nothing more than a tall tale for attention, which seems unlikely from two esteemed teachers. So what really happened then? Did Anne Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain share a hallucination on a trip together? Or did they accidentally walk through time and find themselves in another world, if even for a moment? Number 2. Breaking a story 10 years before it happens. In 1932, a pair of newspaper reporters, J. Bernard Hutton and photojournalist Joachim Brandt, had been assigned to cover a story on the shipyard in Hamburg, Germany. Not the most exciting gig, but hey, sometimes that's being a newspaper reporter. The men drove out to the yard, questioned the workers, spoke to the executives, and had finished everything they were sent out to do by about the middle of the afternoon. Presumably bored out of their minds having to document all the excitement of a 1930s shipyard, the men were rattled to hear the screech of aircraft flying up ahead, and found themselves surrounded by warplanes circling around. The workers were fleeing, and the two journalists tried to flee the scene as quickly as possible, making sure to take several photos to take back to the newspaper as proof of an attack, finding it a much more compelling story than what they'd originally been asked to cover. The security personnel insisted the men had to evacuate as soon as possible. The men fled, saving themselves by a hair. But as they escaped the facility, they found something far more disconcerting. The skies of Hamburg were clear. There was no black smoke, no damage, no warplanes, no panic. The men didn't understand. It was as if the battle lasted for seconds. When Brandt developed his photographs, shockingly, it depicted the shipyard as they'd seen it that morning, completely intact. The editor dismissed all of their claims as a farce, assuming his reporters had just stopped to try some local drinks and came up with a wild story. The two never spoke of the incident again. Until in 1943, a story came out about a Royal Air Force raid on a Hamburg shipyard. It was exactly as the men had described to the detail, 11 years after they had seen it. Number 1, the Philadelphia experiment. If there is any one body on the planet that I am easily convinced has a leg up on time travel, it is the US government. In 1943, the US Navy were attempting to experiment with cloaking technology to be able to render something invisible, with their ultimate goal being a full warship. The USS Eldridge was the subject of these experiments. The experiment was to create a high voltage magnetic field around the ship in order to cloak it or something. Again, I'm a host for a YouTube channel. I am the farthest thing from a scientist. The story goes here that the ship vanished, surrounded by a cloud of green smoke. The crew of the Eldridge complained of severe nausea, several of them complaining of mental breakdowns, extreme mood swings, and disorders after the experiment. Some claim to have even been rematerialized, fused into the bulkheads. Of course, everything about the Philadelphia experiment is as classified can get, documents full of blacked out redacted chunks, so we only have the reports of individual crew members to go off of. One service member from the ship, Al Bielek, claims that the invisibility cloak was all a front, and the true experiment was to travel through time, claiming that for moments the ship had traveled 100 years into the future, but what felt like for only 10 seconds. Now, some of Bialek's claims get a bit out there, difficult to follow, but bear with us because they're interesting to listen to. Bielek claimed that the world of the future was a unified utopia of floating cities and clouds, in a world without governments, being ran by a hyper-intelligent AI called the Synthetic Intelligence Computer System. War and all its conflicts had become a thing of the past. Bielek went on to claim that he was involved in the Montauk Project as well, a conspiracy theory that alleges, as part of the MK Ultra experiments, the US Army was attempting to research psychological warfare and time travel. Now, obviously, the US government did not acknowledge or give the time of day to any of Bielek's claims, but I mean, why would they? They're not going to come out and say, yeah, you got us. Hands up, we've been experimenting with time travel and this guy is blowing the entire thing for us. Or would they just stand by, say nothing, smile, and just insist that we're all just tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorists. Number 5. Time hipster? This one's an absolute classic in the time travelers caught on footage community, of which there are dozens of members. This strange photograph that's made the rounds of a man who looks like he stepped out of time. The photo was taken in 1941 at the reopening of the South Fork Bridge in Canada, but when the photograph was included in a digital gallery in 2010, the internet instantly took to the guy in the crowd who looks like he just walked out of a crypto startup or had just come back from axe throwing and hitting the barcade. This guy is dressed in surprisingly hip clothes, looks like he's wearing contemporary shades, and kinda looks like he's holding a DSLR camera. You'd think a time traveler would be bringing back something a little bit more extravagant, but you know, maybe it was all he could afford. He could have spent all that money on those sweet shades and that cool shirt. Did he come back in time just to get some snaps of a bridge reopening? It seems like you could probably shoot your shot a lot higher if you were messing with the space-time continuum and all that. Nonetheless, the image of the well-dressed hipster in the crowd has sparked a lot of debate, since he definitely doesn't dress like he's from the 30s. Those shades are cooler than anything I've seen in that time period. Underneath what looks to be a contemporary hooded sweatshirt as well, he's wearing a Montreal Maroons jersey, a hockey team that played from 1924 to 1938. So either he's just very hip for the time, or he planned to disguise ahead of time to blend in with the locals. My theory? This guy knows all the best vintage stores are getting cleared out, and he's time traveling, going back to score vintage shirts from the appropriate time period. That Maroons jersey would definitely be a flex in 2022. Number 4. iPhone 1920. Now, if you're pretty active in that aforementioned time travelers caught on footage community, I'm sure you've seen this one as well, but I'm sure we've got some new viewers too, so let's take a look at it. An excerpt from the 1928 film The Circus, starring Charlie Chaplin, an old silent movie about a penniless clown joining the circus. Probably the biggest laugh riot of the late 20s. It would already be a notable piece of American film history, but among those who hunt the truth, it might contain proof of a time traveler. A woman can be seen walking through in the background, wearing unnotable attire for the time period, but holding something up to her ear, which she appears to be talking into? What? As she walks by, it looks eerily like she's talking into a mobile phone of some sort. One has to wonder if she's getting good reception. I doubt Verizon had as many satellites in the 20s. Still, it's hard to deny that it definitely looks like she's talking into a cell phone. Now, some skeptics have offered some possibilities for what it could be, as skeptics are wont to do, with the most popular theory being that it's just a hearing aid of some kind, and the poor woman is just trying to hear better. Another slightly more cute suggestion is that the woman is just a bit camera shy, and is trying to cover her face as she walks by. Or, also a possibility, she could just be an old woman talking to herself and she's having a moment. I've got to say, if she is a time traveler though, she is doing a very sloppy job letting herself get recorded and analyzed like this. Or maybe that's exactly what she wanted. We may never know, but since she's such a popular time traveler, you'd think by now someone would have tried to travel back in time to this incident just to get the facts and finally put a close to the case, right? If no one else will, I will.
Number 3 on this list is Valerie Lukyanova. Valerie is a Ukrainian model who is famous for her uncanny resemblance to Barbie. She's literally known as the real-life Barbie doll, and it truly does stick, folks. She naturally looks a ton like Barbie as is, and then with a few contact lenses and some well done makeup, it is pretty ridiculous. Anyways, she's been known to have some pretty interesting opinions as well. One of these opinions, or maybe experiences, if it actually did happen, is that she is a time-traveling space alien who has come from the future, and she's been sent here with the purpose of helping and changing the human race. Now, she's come out and spoke about this in Vice's online series, My Life. She believes that she is from the future, and she's supposed to change the human race from the human consumer to the human demigod. Which is kind of strange because she markets herself like Barbie, a clear signature of westernized consumerism. Either way, she is from the future and is trying to turn us into demigods. How we are going to become demigods, or what that would even look like, is anyone's best guess, I'd say. She also didn't say what time period she came from, so who knows how far in the future she's from. If, of course, she actually is from the future and this all wasn't some made-up publicity stunt. Number 2 on this list is the hipster. This one is super weird, and I could totally buy into it, honestly. Bustle says, in the early 2010s, a photograph depicting the 1941 reopening of the South Fork Bridge in Goldbridge, British Columbia in Canada went viral for seemingly depicting a man that looked just a bit too modern to have been photographed in 1941. He looks, in fact, like a time-traveling hipster. Graphic t-shirt, textured sweater, sunglasses, the entire works. The photo hadn't been manipulated, the original can be seen here. So, what the heck's going on? Well, Snopes has plenty of reasonable explanations for the man's appearance. Each item he's wearing, for example, could very easily have been acquired in 1941. Others have also backed up those facts. But the bottom line is that it's never been definitively debunked, so the idea that this photograph could depict a man from our time who had traveled back to 1941, it still persists. And I'm gonna be honest here, folks, I disagree with Snopes on this one. Everything about that guy looks like he came from just down my hall. Like, I could totally see that dude sitting in a park just reading a book or taking pictures and 100% buy it. I think he's from the future, but comment down below what you guys think. And finally, number 1 on this list is Anne Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain. Both of these people have claimed to go back in time before. Bustle says, in 1901, 2 English women, Anne Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, took a vacation to France. While they were there, they visited the Palace of Versailles, and while they were at Versailles, they visited what's known as the Petit Trianon, a little chateau on the palace grounds that gave Marie Antoinette a private space for her to hang out and do whatever it was that a teenaged queen did when she was relaxing back then. But while they were there, they claimed they saw some odd occurrences. They said that they spotted people wearing anachronistic clothing, heard mysterious voices, and saw buildings and other structures that were no longer present and indeed hadn't existed since the late 1700s. Finally, they said that they caught sight of Marie Antoinette herself drawing in a sketchbook. They claimed to have fallen into a time slip and briefly transported back more than 100 years before being jolted back to the present by a tour guide. Now, this is pretty scary if it's true, because they didn't even attempt to do this. Imagine if you're just walking down the street. You blink, and when your eyes open again, you are walking down the same street, but 1,000 years prior. Now, this story could be totally fabricated, but the pair seemed adamant that it actually happened. Who knows? Maybe there is a time slip in the palace where you can fall back to the 1700s.
Number 5. Rudolph Fentz. Rudolph Fentz, as the story goes, was a man who was found dead in New York in 1951, but seemed as if that wasn't where he was meant to be, and he had got there by accident, not geographically, like time-wise. Sorry, I'm still trying to work out my time puns, my time jokes. We'll hammer all those out in editing. At 11:15 on June 1951, a man dressed in 19th century attire was seen standing in the middle of the road on a busy New York street. None of the bystanders had seen how he'd arrived there, just that he looked out of sorts, disoriented, and confused. Before anyone could intervene, the man was fatally struck by a taxi. He didn't even have time to yell, "I'm walking here." The story itself could stop here and would be an odd bit of New York history, but it was what was inside the man's pockets that only served to confuse this mystery even more. Let me list it off. On his person, Mr. Fentz had a copper token for a beer worth 5 cents, bearing the name of an unknown saloon that even historians and locals couldn't identify. He had a bill for the care of a horse and the washing of a carriage, coming from a stable that wasn't listed in any address book. He had about $70 worth of vintage American banknotes, a business card with the name Rudolph Fentz, bearing an address on 5th Avenue, and a letter sent to this address, dated 1876 from Philadelphia. And lastly, and maybe most confusingly, a medal for coming 3rd in a 3-legged race. Now, although they had a surprising amount of evidence to identify the man, they couldn't find anything. The captain of the missing persons desk of the NYPD, Hubert Rim, tried everything he could to positively ID this mystery cadaver. Going to the address printed, he found that no one knew who Rudolph Fentz was. Eventually, he found a Rudolph Fentz Jr. in a phone book from 1938, leading the captain to trace Fentz Jr., only to discover that he had passed 5 years earlier, but that his widow had survived him. Interviewing the widow, Captain Rim learned that Fentz's father, one Rudolph Fentz Sr., had gone missing in 1876, aged 29, and had never been found. Huh, so what happened? Did Fentz slip through a temporal portal? Was it intentional? Was he abducted by aliens through time and then dropped off at another completely disconnected point in human history? Maybe. I don't know. And my friends, if you want to experience time travel at home, I've actually perfected it. Listen to what you gotta do. First, you need to get comfy. Then you need to get a snack, maybe a drink too, and then you need to click on some top 5 scary videos. Now get really comfy, get the cat, get a blanket. Next thing you know, it's gonna be 8 hours later because you are gonna be watching this stuff all day. Subscribe and tell me if my theory's right. Number 4, the man from Torrid. Picture a regular day in Tokyo. It's summer, it's hot, It's sticky. It's July and it's 1954, and a man is trying to enter Tokyo. He isn't particularly suspicious, he's conventional looking and fairly average, but he's denied entrance into Japan and detained by the authorities. His passport looks completely genuine and legitimate, with the exception that his passport lists his country of origin as Torrid, a country no one has ever been to because it doesn't exist. So was he just forging a fake passport? Well, this is where things get a bit interesting. When asked to point out where exactly Torrid was on the map, the man angrily insisted that Torrid is exactly where Andorra is, the small landlocked country between France and Spain. He insisted that he'd never heard of Andorra, don't feel bad if you haven't, and that's where Torrid had been, and had been for the last 1,000 years. Now the Japanese officials detaining him were pretty confused, and they discovered that he had money from several different European countries on his person, and his passport, which other than the fact that it was from a country that doesn't exist, appeared totally genuine and had been stamped several times already, even by Tokyo. The police were determined to get to the bottom of what it was they were dealing with, as they were more than a bit confused, wondering if they were experiencing the world's most elaborate prank, or perhaps there was something more to the story. They contacted the company he'd worked for, and the company claimed they had never heard of him before, even though the man from Torrid had several pages worth of documents proving his employment. The hotel he had a reservation for? Never heard of him. The company he was meeting in Tokyo? Never heard of him. After a while of investigations that were only turning up more questions than answers, police returned to his hotel room to release him, only to discover that the man had vanished. No one saw him leave the hotel, and there was no way he could have escaped from the window, as the hotel room was nearly on the top floor and there were no balconies. In the years succeeding, there have been all kinds of rumors and speculations as to just what the man from Torrid was. Some have put forward that he could have been a time traveler. It's definitely possible. Another prevailing theory is that he's a man from a different timeline or a different reality altogether, who somehow fell into this one. With this line of thinking, is it unreasonable to consider that the man from Torrid wasn't from this world at all? Could he have been a visitor from another planet? Could Torrid have been the name of his planet? Our visitor's true home? I mean, maybe. Number 3. Time traveling car. This next video, footage from a dash cam in Russia from a patrol vehicle uploaded to YouTube, has garnered millions of views and lots of puzzled viewers. Fairly ordinary scene, a blocked up intersection and jam-packed rush hour traffic. As the car in front of our car starts to drive forward, it turns to the left and we see another car appear out of completely nowhere, like it just materialized out of the ether. Now, the most logical, sound, and scientific explanation is obviously that this car is a ghost, but let's try and take this seriously for a bit here and use our brains and think rationally. It is possible that this is a Back to the Future situation, and this car is traveling through time and just happens to be materializing, careening through this intersection. I mean, when you watch this clip, it really does seem like this car comes out of nowhere. You don't see it at all until you do. Now, unfortunately, a strong bit of evidence against the time travel theory is that we don't see any blazing tire treads on the road, which is a universally recognized sign of proof that a time traveling car has been through here. Still, until we get a scientist of some kind to take a look at this clip and explain to me indisputably what is happening, I am resigned to say that this is absolutely time travel. Number 2. Pandora's MacBook. Take a look at this ancient Greek statue. It depicts a young girl offering something of note to what looks to be a noblewoman accepting the gift. Taking a look at the gift though, it looks suspiciously like it's a little girl trying to show an older woman something on her laptop. I mean, look at it. It's even got charging ports in the side. And it doesn't look like there's a USB slot though, so we have to assume it is history's first MacBook. Typical. Now, skeptics argue that it could be a depiction of a very hollow chest or a thin chest, but if this little girl is supposed to be offering the noblewoman a gift, I would say what good gift is going to come in a package that small? At best, it's a gift card, which is absolutely terrible, says you weren't thinking about it at all. It seems a lot more likely to me that someone traveled back to ancient Greece and maybe left their laptop somewhere, or offered it to the people as a gift of technological prowess from the future. Imagine traveling to an ancient civilization and showing them a MacBook. You would be heralded as their god. And if you showed them Fortnite, oh, they would be writing myths about you for eons. What if over the years, all the things that have been described as being godly, mythical powers were really just time-traveling pranksters going back to mess with the time stream a little bit? I'm very confident that if humanity ever does attain the ability to travel through time, teenagers will mostly use it to pull pranks and create irreversible damage to the timeline. In fact, I am almost certain that has already happened, given how odd the last couple years have been for us. Number 1. Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves may very well be the greatest actor of all time. A big statement, I know, but it is a hill I will protect with my life. Name a bad Keanu Reeves performance. You can't. From Neo to John Wick to Johnny Silverhand all the way to Theodore Logan III, Keanu Reeves always delivers. And it makes sense because he's been acting for a very long time. Maybe a very, very, very long time. There are an alarming amount of paintings and photos throughout history of people who appear to be the stunning image of Keanu Reeves. Now, the most likely answer, of course, is that Keanu Reeves has been traveling through time several times to research and prepare for whatever role he needs. Here he is as King Charlemagne, who was buried hurriedly in cold weather, perhaps as a way to cover up that the actor had to leave the role and there was nothing to bury. Here he is as Paul Mounet, a French actor who appeared in multiple silent films, who would later go on to be a professor. When Mounet passed, his body was never found, probably because he had to travel back to our timeline to be on The Tonight Show. Worth noting is that when directly confronted about his possible immortality or latent time-traveling ability by Jimmy Fallon, Keanu did not outright deny it, instead only offering the quote, "We're all stardust, baby," which is absolutely something a man who has seen the depths of the cosmos would say. In a 2014 interview, when questioned about giving away the sum of his Matrix earnings to the stunt crew, he responded, "Money is the last thing I think about. I could live on what I have already made for the next few centuries." And maybe he already has. Number 5. Victor Goddard. Royal Air Force Commander Victor Goddard was a flying ace who served with the RAF in the First and Second World Wars, who seemed to be a vessel for paranormal activity. In 1935, during action in the Second World War, Sir Goddard was sent to investigate the condition of an abandoned Scottish airfield in the unnotable village of Drem, east of Edinburgh. When Goddard flew over the field, he reported it as they'd expected, that it was as they described, a desolate, abandoned airfield where the cows were grazing on grass that had forced itself through. As he circled the airfield, however, he found himself caught in a storm cloud that had been passing overhead and had to fight to regain control. When exiting the cloud, Goddard found himself frozen in fear, looking down and reporting that the airfield had been completely repaired. The airbase had been restored, now fueling and stocking 4 biplanes in its hangar. The abandoned field was now crewed by a staff of mechanics, all dressed in blue coveralls, unlike the RAF at the time, which would have worn brown uniforms. The planes on the field too had been painted a bright yellow, contrasting with the usual drab silver of the RAF at the time. The storm cloud passed through again, and Goddard reported it vanished yet again. Had he passed through a temporal loop? Was there something more in that storm? Most concerningly and most interestingly, in 1939 the airfield at Drem was restored completely to working order, and shockingly, the RAF mechanic uniforms were updated to be blue coveralls and the planes started to be painted yellow, as if for a moment Goddard had seen years into the future. The incident haunted Goddard, and he wrote about his experiences in his book Flight Towards Reality, where he tried to make some sense of his brief flight through time. Number 4. Mike Markham. In 1995, Mike Markham was a 21-year-old student majoring in electricity with a knack for homemade gadgets. His goal? To create a time machine out of scraps in his home in Missouri. The device, which he had dubbed Jacob's Ladder, referring to the biblical ladder to the heaven, and less likely the fantastic 90s horror film, was constructed using the laser from a compact disc player and a continuous arc between 2 poles. And you know what, if I'm being honest, I'm more of a Morty than I am a Rick. I got no idea how he built this and I got no idea what it does, but he says it would help him travel through time. Markham claimed that his device produced such energy that when he threw a piece of sheet metal into it, it disappeared and reappeared seconds later. Hoping to see what he could do with some real power, Markham stole 6 transformers from a power grid nearby. His next experiment caused a blackout in the neighborhood, and his theft alerted the local police. Markham spent the next few months in jail, but upon his release was stunned to discover that he'd become a bit of a local hero. After an interview on a radio station, calls were pouring in from people who wanted to donate money, supplies, and their own ideas on how to help Markham with his time travel device. For the next 2 years, Markham would work tirelessly on his machine, having rebuilt the plans to be the size of a man. 1997 would be the last update from Mike Markham, who vanished from the public eye and the world at large, with his whereabouts being unknown since then. After missing a call from his parole officer, police tried to track Markham down, going to the warehouse he used as a workshop, finding nothing but burned up machines, damaged electronics, and no sign of life at all. Did Markham's machine work? Well, we may never know unless he decides to come back. or forward. Number 3, John Teeter. John Teeter is the name of a man who claimed he had traveled back in time during the 2000s. Kind of an odd time to travel back in time too, unless maybe you're hatching a complicated scheme to invest in Bitcoin. Anyway, Teeter made his post on the Time Travel Institute forum where he claimed to be a soldier from the far off year of 2036. We've got about 12 years to see if any of what he claimed is right, although mild spoiler warning, he's been wrong for most of it. Regardless, let's take a look together. He claims that he had been sent back in time as part of a US government operation to the year 1976, where Mr. Teeter was sent back to recover an IBM 5100 computer as it was essential to debugging something in his timeline or something, some time travel stuff. Now, there's a lot more working against Mr. Teeter being a time traveler than there is evidence working for him. Foremost, that a lot of his predictions for the future ended up being totally bogus. For one, he claimed there would be a civil war in the United States in the year 2005. This civil war would grow so much into such an unstoppable force that the United States would split up into 5 main regions, and eventually the dissolution of the states would lead into World War III starting in 2015. Now, 2015 is kind of a blur for me. That's when I started college. I don't really remember a lot of it, but I don't remember World War III happening. Although Teeter himself posited that because he traveled back in time, he created a new time stream caused by this disruption, and therefore any of his predictions could end up not coming true in this altered state. It kind of sounds like an excuse to me, Mr. Teeter, but what do I know? I'm not a time traveler. I can't remember if this follows the rules they set in Avengers Endgame or not. Now, true believers and fair skeptics, is it all possible that the reason Mr. Teeter set himself backwards in time because he wasn't just looking for computer parts, but to repair some sort of alien craft? Is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? Probably not. Is it very fun to speculate on the internet? Absolutely. Number 2, Victor Goddard. Royal Air Force Commander Victor Goddard was an RAF flying ace with a storied career, having flown through missions in both the First and Second World Wars, and also possibly flew through a time vortex once. Don't worry, I'll explain that. In 1935, Goddard was serving during the Second World War, flying a fairly routine mission. He was sent to check out the status of an abandoned Scottish airfield in the unremarkable village of Drem, east of Edinburgh. Sorry, Drem. If we have any Drem viewers, just know that the article I was reading for information called it unremarkable, not me. I would never say that. Goddard flew over the field, and he reported back to HQ that Drem was as unremarkable as they described. I'm so sorry. The airfield was abandoned, desolate, grass overgrown over what remaining buildings still stood, populated mostly by free-spirited cows who were grazing on grass and serving no masters. Circling back around, Goddard found himself caught in a storm that had been passing, causing him to panic for a bit and fight for control of the craft. He circled through, and as he exited the storm, he saw something he could not comprehend. He looked back down and found himself completely frozen in fear. Reporting back once again, he noted that the airfield he'd flown out to was completely restored. There were 4 biplanes in the hangar, and the cows had all been replaced with a staff of mechanics dressed in blue uniforms. The planes on the field were all painted bright yellow, unlike the usual drab silver of the RAF at the time. Goddard was beyond confused. I mean, can you blame him? Had he uncovered a secret base? Was he looking at the enemy? An ally? Was any of this even real? After a few loops around, Goddard found himself caught in the storm yet again, and this time as he exited, he noted that the airfield had returned to its default state, desolated, destroyed, once again populated by cows. The incident shocked Goddard to his core and haunted him. He tried to write about it in a biography about his life called Flight Towards Reality, but he never got any good answers about what he saw. Perhaps most confusingly about the whole ordeal is that what he reported seeing, the blue coveralled mechanics and yellow planes, would end up being the standard service wear for the RAF a few years after the incident in 1939, when the Drem airfield was also reconstructed. Is it possible somehow that Goddard managed to slip forward in time a few years? Was he caught in a vortex? Was the cloud perhaps some sort of unbelievable extraterrestrial technology that he was simply swept up in something larger than himself? Or was the whole experience a product of too much coffee before a mission and not enough sleep? Number 1, Mike Markham. In the best movies, time travel is perfected by one lone scientist working round the clock in a garage tirelessly, perhaps just a little bit off of his rocker. Now, don't think I'm passing judgment at all here. The best leaps in technology have been made by men who were more than a little bit off their rocker. Enter Mike Markham, who in 1995 claims to have cracked the code for time travel with stuff he had lying around the house. He was a 21-year-old electrical engineering major who loved building gizmos at home, but his magnum opus was a device he called the Jacob's Ladder, which was a personal time machine that could send a human being backwards or forwards in time. Now, I can't even begin to parse the explanation for the machine. They didn't hire me for my brain, but if you go hunting after this video, you'll be able to find some detailing how how the machine works. But what I can tell you is that it was constructed from a laser from inside a CD player and a continuous arc between two poles. Again, I don't know how this works, I'm just reporting the facts. Markham claimed that his device was capable of generating such energy that when he threw a piece of sheet metal into it, it disappeared and reappeared seconds later, which sounds terrifying. I don't know if I want to be on a time machine that's reconstructing me Enterprise Transporter style. There are just way too many accidents involved with stuff like that. Unsatisfied with just a piece of sheet metal traveling through the time stream, Markham set out on seeing what would happen if he hooked Jacob's ladder up to a massive power grid and stole 6 transformers from a local station. This experiment would cause a blackout in the neighborhood, leading to Markham's arrest. Now, he would spend a few months in jail, but the incident garnered enough local attention that Markham became a bit of a local hero, and was stunned to discover that after his release, there were offers from aid from pretty much all over, from people offering to donate supplies, money, time, you name it. The people want to time travel. With all the newfound aid, Markham would spend the next 2 years working on the Jacob's Ladder Mark II, having now rebuilt it to accommodate the size of a person. Updates from Markham would end around 1997 though, when he vanished from the public eye and the world at large. He missed a meeting with his parole officer, and when police responded to try and track Markham down, they found the warehouse that he was using as his personal workshop, but they didn't find him there. They just found burnt up machines, damaged electronics, and singed walls. So did Markham's machine work? Well, maybe when he comes back from time, he can tell us.
Number 5. UFO footage. When we talk about unidentified flying objects, we tend to think about aliens from distant planets showing up in flying saucers to abduct and probe unsuspecting humans. But what if these visitors from another planet are not interstellar travelers, but simply our descendants using advanced technology from the future to visit the past, which is of course our present? Such is the theory put forward by Dr. Michael P. Masters in his book Identified Flying Objects, a multidisciplinary scientific approach to the UFO phenomenon. Masters believes that these travelers are using their craft to not only experience, but study the past, and that people who are abducted by aliens are actually being studied by anthropologists. As he himself puts it, the alleged abduction accounts are mostly scientific in nature. It's probably future anthropologists, historians, linguists that are coming back to get information in a way that we currently can't without access to that technology. That said, I do think that some component of it is also tourism. Undoubtedly, in the future, there are those that will pay a lot of money to have the opportunity to go back and observe their favorite period in history. Some of the most popular tourist sites are the pyramids of Giza and Machu Picchu in Peru, and old prehistoric sites. There's certainly still missing pieces of the puzzle, he said. There are aspects of time that we don't yet understand. Wanted is a theory of quantum gravity, and we can meld general relativity and quantum mechanics. I'm just trying to put forth the best model I can based on the current scientific knowledge. Hopefully, over time, we can continue to build on this. Of course, one could argue that the idea of UFOs being time travelers is a more complicated and less likely theory than aliens, but Masters believes the opposite is true, saying, "We know we're here. We know humans exist. We know that, and we've had a long evolutionary history on this planet, and we know our technology is going to be more advanced in the future. I think the simplest explanation, innately, is that it is us. I'm just trying to offer what is likely the most parsimonious explanation." If Masters is correct in his theory, and extraterrestrials are really extratempestrials, as he has dubbed them, then all the footage of unidentified flying objects that has been discovered, including both the amateur tapes and the ones that were released to the public officially by the Pentagon a few years ago, are actually footage of time travel in action. This could explain how so many UFOs appear to be moving at speeds that are impossible for current craft to achieve, and how they seem to appear and disappear in what seems like an instant. Number 4. The James Webb Telescope. Our next entry is a bit more literal and less grand than the others on this list, but it is still worth mentioning. The James Webb Telescope may not be able to transport us back in time, but what it can do is let us look into the distant past, perhaps to show us where we came from as a species, at the moment of creation. The James Webb Space Telescope was first launched in late December 2021. It was a collaborative project between NASA, the European Space Agency, and the Canadian Space Agency. It uses infrared astronomy to view things in the vast cosmos of space that would be impossible for even the Hubble Space Telescope to see, with its first release image being touted as the deepest photo of the universe ever taken. But what does this have to do with time travel? Well, as NASA scientists explained it, telescopes can be time machines. Looking out in space is like looking back in time. It sounds magical, but it's actually very simple. Light needs time to travel across the vast distances of space to reach us. So, light moves at a speed of about 1 billion kilometers per hour. So the time it takes the light from a light bulb to reach your eyes is pretty much imperceptible. But light that is reaching you from millions or billions of kilometers away, such as the light of a star, can be centuries, millennia, or even eons old by the time we see it. So the James Webb Telescope isn't just the telescope that can view the furthest into the universe. It is also the telescope that can see the furthest back in time, showing images of galaxies of stars as they appeared 13.5 billion years ago. Scientists hope that they will be able to use the telescope to look even further back in time in order to see the first few 100 million years of the universe after the Big Bang, so that we can observe the forces that resulted in the birth of our little blue planet in action.
In third place, we have the Die Glock device. Since this device happens to be from World War II, I apologize in advance for how nonsensical I might sound, since the interweb world doesn't really like the name of the evil dictator at the time or his Yahtzee followers. In his 2001 book, The Hunt for Zero Point, author Nick Cook identified claims about Die Glock as having originated in the 2000 Polish book, The Truth About the Wonder Weapon by Igor Witkowski. Nick describes Igor's claims of a device called the Bell, engineered by Yahtzee scientists, that was a glowing, rotating contraption rumored to have some kind of anti-gravitational effect and be a time machine. I know I've already mentioned Doctor Who today, but when it's right, it's right. According to Nick, Die Glock was a bell-shaped, about 12 feet high and 9 feet in diameter, and incorporated two high-speed, counter-rotating cylinders filled with a purplish, liquid, metallic-looking substance that was supposed to be highly radioactive, with the codename Xerum 525. He recounts claims that scientists and technicians who worked on the Bell, and who did not, die of its effects, or disappear mysteriously, were wiped out by the SS at the close of the war, and the device was moved to an unknown location. Nick proposed that SS official Hans Kemmler later secretly traded this technology to the US military in exchange for his freedom. Historical theorists are pretty sure that a concrete ring called the Henge near the Wenceslas mine that was built in 1943 and vaguely resembled Stonehenge was used as a launch pad for the Bell. Igor's book was translated to English in 2003, and he claimed to have discovered evidence of Die Glock in a review of World War II era documents that were declassified by the Polish government, which led him to additional research via the archives and interviews. The first document, allegedly supplied to Igor by an unnamed Polish government official, was an affidavit from the war crimes trial for General Jacob Sporenberg, who supposedly confessed to ordering the deaths of around 60 people who had knowledge of the secretive project. Kurt de Bus, Werner von Braun, and Walter Gerlach were also allegedly implicated in the Die Glock research. Igor claims Die Glock was organized under a division of the Waffen-SS and operated mainly at facilities in Lower Silesia. Die Glock was conceived in early 1942, and active experimentation began around mid-1944. Prisoners from the Gross Rosen concentration camp were exposed to radiation from Die Glock, resulting in many deaths and health problems. Survivors of the camp reported witnessing tests of the Die Glock, reporting a bright bluish light from the object. Igor believes Xerum 525 was likely an irradiated form of mercury, used in the creation of a form of plasma that was intended as a weapon or propulsion system, and which would have been capable of distorting space and time. So what you're telling me is that there is indeed a time-traveling device out there? I just need to find it? Game on. In second place, we have a very confused driver. Back in 1969, Elsie and his business associate, Bob, were driving along Highway 167 towards the oil center city of Lafayette after finishing lunch in the southwest Louisiana town of Abbeville, United States. It was the 20th of October and around 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon when they spotted an old turtleback car going really slow. They were, intrigued by the vehicle because it wasn't something either of them had seen before. I had to look it up myself because I am honestly the most vehicle unaware person to exist. wildest. Honest to goodness, I exasperated the heck out of my dad growing up, and to this day. He can go on and on and on about car makes, models, all the specifics, and I just sit there with no thoughts in my brain. For what it's worth, the vehicle in question would be very unique to the eye, and definitely an antique. But here's the thing, even though the vehicle looked like a blast from the past, it was in mint condition. The duo overtook the vehicle, but not before slowing down right next to it to check it out, in detail, just for curiosity's sake. Clearly printed on it, which was quite odd, because antique cars weren't allowed to be driven on the road at that time unless they were being used for a ceremonial parade. Things just got weirder from there. The person driving the car was a young woman dressed in a 1940s dress, complete with a hat and fur coat, and she was accompanied by a small boy who also was dressed in a heavy coat and a cap. As the men pulled up next to the car, the lady started panicking, frantically looking back and forth as if she was in the middle of somewhere completely unknown. So Elsie asked her if she needed any help, to which she responded yes. But at no point did she roll down the window or even look him in the eye. After asking her several times to halt the vehicle so they could help, the guys finally saw her pull over on the side of the road. Elsie and Bob passed her and pulled over in front of her, but as soon as they looked behind them, the woman's vehicle was gone, as if it had completely vanished into thin air. So this was a highway without any traffic, so no disappearing of this could be possible in any way. Completely shocked and not knowing how to describe what had just happened, Elsie and Bob decided to keep on driving on. A little while later, while they were still on Highway 167, they saw another new car pass a very old car at a really slow speed. It was apparently so slow that it looked like the cars had come to a halt. And as soon as the new car pulled over in front of the old car, the same thing happened. It stopped and then completely disappeared. They couldn't believe their eyes. And neither would I. Even the guy in the other car was completely shocked. The three started describing what each had seen while walking around the area in hopes of finding some sort of evidence. The third guy insisted they should be reporting this to the police, as this, according to him, was a missing person case. Elsie and Bob refused, more so because they had no idea where the woman and the boy, along with the car, had vanished. They never saw the vehicle again, so I hope that lady and her ward found their way home. In first place, we have the Wall Street time traveler. On the 28th of January in 2003, a 44-year-old man named Andrew Carlson was arrested and detained by the police for insider trading on Wall Street. Over a 2-week period in the stock market, Andrew went from having $800 to making, okay guess, go on, $350 million. Whatever he invested turned into gold. So I asked my dad about his odds, and he confirmed that it's nearly impossible to make the kind of profits he did without, insider knowledge. He was arrested by the cops on the allegation that he must have had, illegal insider information. But when asked why and how he did this, during a 4-hour-long confession, Andrew claimed to be a man from the year 2256. Since he was from the future, he claimed he knew exactly how the 126 stocks he invested in were going to perform. Now, obviously, the cops thought this guy was chatting just rubbish. But soon after he was released on bail, the man disappeared from the face of Earth, and even after repeated attempts, he was not found. Was he telling the truth? Who knows, but wait for it. I'm gonna blow your mind. Andrew predicted the exact date of the US invasion of Iraq. I know. I don't know. I do not know.
Number 5. With the James Webb Telescope, NASA has found a way to be able to peer back into time, literally, and look deeper into the cosmos than ever before. The speed of light is 300,000 kilometers a second, meaning that it takes about 8 minutes for light from the sun to hit Earth, meaning the rays of the sun are not real time, but rather already 8 minutes old when you see it. So using that same thinking, most stars are light years and light years away. And for those at home, a light year is 9.46 trillion kilometers. So really, hop, skip, and a jump away. The James Webb Telescope is able to see so deeply into space that it's able to see light emitted from stars 13.5 billion years ago, after the dawn of the Big Bang. So in a sense, we can travel through time and are able to see light from the advent of the universe. It's not quite the TARDIS hurtling through the galaxy, but it is an unimaginable achievement, and one that will be surpassed sooner than we think. If you're liking what we're doing here at Top 5 Scary, why not toss a little subscribe our way? And I promise the rest of the ones on this list will be time travel. I just wanted to slip one little educational thing in there for you. Number 4. The Chronovisor. One of the most secretive places in the world is undoubtedly the Vatican's archives. It's been said that it's one of the most secure buildings on the planet, so if you're planning an Ocean's 11 kind of deal, think again. We can only speculate what sort of things they have locked away in there, but it has been said that they have technologies we could not believe in there. Like, the Chronovisor. According to French priest and paranormal investigator Francois Brune, the Chronovisor was a device that allowed members of the Vatican to see into the past. Brune claims that the Chronovisor was first built in the 50s by a scientist and priest, Father Pellegrino Maria Ernetti, along with a council of scientists working in secret around the clock. Brune's description of the seemingly magic device was that it was a large cabinet made of unknown metals connected with a series of levers and buttons. Apparently, it could be programmed to see any date in the past, past. From Brune's accounts, Ernetti used it to see all sorts of wondrous things, from a speech given by Napoleon Bonaparte, watching the crucifixion, and recovering fragments of a lost ancient tragedy play called Thyestes, just transcribed to the modern day. Now, obviously, there's going to be some skepticism as to whether or not the chronovisor exists or ever existed at all. I mean, it's a pretty bold claim. A photo that Ernetti claimed was a real-life photo of the crucifixion later turned out to be nothing more than just an edited wood carving. Unfortunately, we may never know the truth behind the chronovisor, since the doors to the Vatican's vault are locked very, very, very tightly.
Number 3. Time travel at Area 51. Next up, we have a Reddit post from an anonymous user who claims to be a former employee of the infamous Area 51, who stumbled upon footage that proves the existence of time travel. This post should of course be taken with a massive grain of salt, but the mechanics of time travel it talks about are worth discussing, so I have included it on this list. As the user themselves put it, I worked for years at Area 51, being brought in on Janet Airlines and getting paid through companies I had never worked for, just like many other employees have. In my time there, my main job was sorting and archiving the footage and notes of various projects that they were researching or working on. I would see notes and tapes of the various experimental aircraft we were developing, hours of grainy UFO footage, and anything else you can imagine from such a secretive branch of the government. However, one of the strangest things to cross my desk was not about aliens, but about the government's attempts to harness the power of time travel. The transcripts, and presumably the accompanying recordings they were based off of, were labeled as Project Throwback, and they talked about how in the late 90s, the government had created a machine based off of alien technology recovered from various UFO crashes over the years that they believed might be able to send people back in time. They had created the machine and wanted to begin testing it, thinking that the ability to change history in a way that aligned with American interests could be an amazing win for our country. The disasters and attacks that could be prevented alone made it worth the time and money that would be required to create such a tool. After years of working on it, it was finally time to test it. The goal of the test was to send a man back in time a day in the past as proof of concept. In order to avoid any potential paradoxes that they didn't know the potential consequences of, they had a site designated for the test pilot from the future to go to and return from without crossing paths with his past self or the scientists who were working on the project, so that they wouldn't know the results of the experiment outside of its proper chronology. The machine seemed to work at first, disappearing with the pilot as expected. However, the craft never returned, and no evidence of him in the designated site was found. The scientists involved theorized in their reports that the pilot may have been killed in his time travel attempt, or may have created a branch reality where the experiment was a success. But there is no way to know where he went for sure, or if we can ever bring him back. Now, obviously the veracity of this Reddit post is dubious at best, but the idea of time travel creating alternate timelines where the changes take hold as opposed to the more commonly used in pop culture version of time travel, where one timeline is being changed and affected, is interesting. Does this story of an Area 51 employee coming across a tape proving that the government is experimenting with temporal travel have any element of truth to it? And if it does, what happened to the pilot of the machine? Where and when did he end up? There is no way to know for sure. Number 2. Time-traveling priests of the Vatican. The Vatican City is a sacerdotal monarchical state that is ruled by the Pope, making it a city-state. The Vatican is extremely secretive and is the source of thousands of conspiracy theories that range from highly improbable to basically confirmed. Somewhere on that spectrum, you will find the tale of the Vatican's device for looking through time that is known simply as the chronovisor. The theory came to light in 1972 when an Italian newspaper published a story claiming that a monk/scientist by the name of Marcello Pellegrino Ernetti had led a team of scientists including Erno Fermi and Werner von Braun to use the principle that energy is neither created nor destroyed, it only transforms, in order to create a machine that would allow them to see and hear through time in order to witness sounds and images of important historical events. Some media claims that Ernetti was able to use this machine to capture footage of Jesus on his way to his crucifixion, to view and transcribe lost ancient Greek plays, and witness speeches made by historical figures such as Napoleon. Apparently the machine was deemed to be too dangerous by the Vatican and was either hidden away or destroyed. Lending some credence to this story is a decree from the Vatican in 1988 that threatened excommunication for any person using a device that matched the description of the chronovisor. Is the chronovisor real? And if so, does it still exist, hidden somewhere in the Vatican archives? And what happened to Ernetti's footage and images of historical events which would prove the veracity of this scientific marvel? If the device could only be used to see through time and not interact with it, what were Vatican officials so afraid people would see that they hid away the device? Number 1. A time traveler's LAPD interview. In 1984, a bizarre series of attacks began to take place, with several women with the same name being targeted and attacked. Police got wise to the pattern and were able to find one of the women before she was killed. They were also able to take a man into custody who was telling a bizarre story that he claimed explained everything. The man was believed to be homeless and insane, but he was interviewed by a criminal psychologist who took down his statement. The entire interview was of course filmed by the police, but very little of it, if any, was believed. The man claimed that he had traveled back in time from the year 2027, where he had been a soldier in a war against a rogue SAC-NORAD program that had become self-aware and attacked humanity in a nuclear attack. He claimed that they had won the war, but that the computers had sent a robot back in time to try and change the outcome, but that he had followed to prevent this. These claims were of course written off as a paranoid delusion, but soon after, the precinct was attacked by a large man who seemed intent on ending the lives of everyone in the building. Security footage of the attack shows the attacker shrugging off bullets and effortlessly wiping out the precinct. The supposed time traveler and the woman managed to escape. The woman was eventually institutionalized after having a mental breakdown, presumably caused by the incident, but neither the supposed time traveler or the attacker were ever seen again. Were they really from a dystopian future? Where did the attacker go? And most importantly, will he be back? We may never know for sure.
Kicking off today's list, in 5th place, we have A Tale from a Pilot. Now, if I've said it once, I've said it a million times, but I place a lot of belief and trust in experiences that come from pilots, since they are legitimately trained to recognize the unknown in the air and remember everything about what they see. My ADHD brain could never, ever remember that much, unless it's like a hyperfixation, but even then I wouldn't trust it to remember anything on command when I'm overwhelmed. So back in 1935, when he was, a wing commander, Sir Victor Goddard was instructed to inspect an inactive airbase located in Drem, near Edinburgh in Scotland. While flying over it, Sir Goddard found the airbase to be in a poor state, with cattle grazing on the wild grass that had now forced its way through the tarmac. The entire place was completely in shambles. Later on that day, while flying his plane, he got into a bit of trouble thanks to the harsh weather conditions, and to avoid an accident, Sir Goddard decided to fly back to the abandoned airbase till the weather cleared out a bit. Just take your chances. As he approached the airbase, the torrential rain oddly and very abruptly gave way to bright sunshine, when Sir Victor noticed that the airbase was not only in mint condition all of a sudden, but in use. He spotted mechanics wearing blue overalls working on the yellow planes parked on the runway, but was unable to recognize a single aircraft on the base. There was no way the place could have gone from decrepit to fully renovated and operational in like half an afternoon, and more importantly, these guys weren't wearing the khaki colored uniforms that were a norm back then. Also, the Air Force painted all their planes in silver, not yellow. Completely baffled by what the heck was going on, Sir Goddard got the shock of his life 4 years later. Europe was war-torn and he happened to visit Drem again, but this time he saw everything he saw 4 years back in 1935. So the same people in blue overalls servicing yellow planes, and he even found the plane he couldn't recognize before, now identifying it as a Miles Magister. I've had a glimpse into the future before myself, but never anything that detailed. I just predicted like one small event on the grand scheme of things. Thank goodness he didn't go mad from it, because I know I would have. In 4th place, we have the time-traveling hipster. No. I'm not talking about the 11th Doctor. I'm more partial to the 9th, but I digress. In 2004, a black and white photo in the Their Past Lives Here exhibit at the Ray Lorne Pioneer Museum in British Columbia came to be, and went largely unnoticed until the collection was digitized in 2010. The photo in question showed a crowd of spectators at an event, and on the back there was a note stating that it was taken in 1941 at the reopening of the South Fork Bridge in British Columbia. Nobody knows who took the photo, and the identity of anyone in the crowd is also completely unavailable. So when the collection made its way online, several internet users picked up on an oddity in the bridge photo. Popular websites got wind of the mystery and started republishing the photo in question. So you're probably asking by now, okay Alexa, you've said photo enough, what's so special about it? There's a single man in the crowd who looks completely out of place. Kinda like how I would look in a church right now, dressed like this, or at my job where I wear a uniform. The man's appearance is way too modern to fit within 1947. He's wearing wearing a modern t-shirt and modern sunglasses, and he's holding a camera that's way too small to have existed in 1941. Like, think those little digital cameras from the early 2000s. I used to have one. His appearance amongst men and women dressed much more formally and in keeping with the era has led him to be dubbed the time-traveling hipster. Many folks, myself included, are pretty sure that the man was an imposter sent from the future to take photos of the South Fork Bridge for some unknown purpose. I know where y'all are going here with your brains, but Alexa, what if it was photoshopped for attention? Maybe the museum needed funding. As if I was gonna leave that stone unturned. The first piece of evidence to support its authenticity is actually from a second photo. It's a photo of the same event, but from a different angle. It was discovered shortly after the first one went viral. It is part of the John Wixkin collection and is captioned, "Opening of the new bridge at South Fork." So this close-up shows the same modern-looking man from the original photo. Sure, it might be like a stretch, not completely impossible, to say that both photographs are fakes, given their different origins. Thankfully, we have more evidence of the original photograph's authenticity. In December of 2010, Evgeny Balamotenko and his colleague from Russian television channel NTV determined it was real and unedited with the help of a museum staffer. So my theory is that someone wanted to test out a time machine in a way that, he could have visible proof of it working in the future, but without invading a massive event. Like, imagine if everyone with, like a time machine went to the opening day of Disneyland. That would be pretty obvious. So they just picked something random, and here we are.
Number 3. Gateway experience. The CIA was fascinated with harnessing psychic ability. This is very well documented, with several projects being released to the public about this sort of thing. To simplify it as much as I possibly can, the project was centered around using a combination of hypnosis and finely tuned audio to create an altered state of consciousness. The thinking was that through binaural beats, the output of the left and right hemispheres of the brain would sync up and make you more psychic good, I guess. The summation from one of the researchers is that a human brain operating normally is kind of like a lamp. But when both hemispheres are in sync, this light turns into a laser, reaching farther and more effective than before. The goal was to expand the human consciousness and have it reach outside the body, being able to astrally project yourself back in time. Test subjects would meditate in a mantra saying, "I am just a physical body, and I deeply desire to expand my consciousness." While listening to this hypnotic audio, putting their body into a sleep state, the subjects were told to visualize time as a wheel with spokes that point to events in their past, and just find a way to transport their consciousness back to those moments. In the early tests, less than 5% of the subjects were able to achieve this, but the team believed that with years of practice they'd be able to harness this ability better. The final stage of the learning and experience was an out-of-body movement, where the subject would be able to lift their consciousness out of the body entirely and harmoniously interact with the environment. However, unfortunately, no one in the project was able to reach this stage just yet. Number 2. In 2019, Reddit user Flard posted a story captioned, "Time travel is not what you think it's like." In the post, the user named Clark details the experience he had in college at Georgia State University when he was approached by someone scouting for a clinical trial dubbed Project BTAOW33. A little disappointing that it doesn't have a super cool name like Project Majestic or Project ZK47 or something, but okay. Going along, the researchers promised to pay for Clark's tuition in exchange for participating in a clinical trial. Clark met with the researchers and was taken to a small nondescript house in the Georgian mountain woods, wherein laid a silver metal house with a ring surrounding it, which the crew insisted the test subjects avoid coming into any contact with. Clark continues and says that there were only 2 other people participating in the trial with him, 2 other students of a similar age, a young man and a young woman. The 3 of them were ushered into the home and introduced to the experiment. The doctors told them they would be launching 3 hours into the future, and the entire house would be transported, and in 3 hours they would reapparate. The doctors reassured them that it would be completely safe, as they practiced on rats and dogs, although they didn't know what it would feel like. After a brief explanation, the doctors drove off to their control site to begin the experiment. And here's where it gets weird. Clark claims that outside became dark instantly. And not just dark, like black, like the abyss, like an unmoving void. In the post, he describes it as like being between dreams. He claims from here that the 3 test subjects began to panic, shaking around the room, desperately trying to see something outside or escape this house that they've been locked in. Clark claims that he has no idea how long he was stuck inside that building, saying it could have been anywhere from minutes to hours to even days. One of the subjects attempted to escape, and he said he was lost to the void entirely. So what happened? Well, Clark claims that after an extended period of stasis in this void, they did appear 3 hours later in time, just like they had claimed, and that after being returned home, He'd never heard from the researchers or the project again. Number 1. The Philadelphia experiment was a US military experiment performed sometime around October 1943. The USS Eldridge was the center of these top-secret Black Ops level tests. Officially, the project was to prototype advanced cloaking technology, with the intention being able to render an entire warship invisible. Think like what the Predator does, but for a battleship. Well, that would already be unnerving enough. Legend has it that the story runs deeper than that, and that the cloaking, ironically, was a cover for the true reason behind the trial, which was experimenting with time travel. Witnesses of the experiment claim that they saw the USS Eldridge disappear into a cloud of green smoke surrounding the ship, where it then vanished, before reappearing after a few seconds. Reports from the crew are horrifying to say the least, where they claim that they were affected in various disturbing ways. Crew complaining of intense headaches, nausea, some claiming they suffered mental issues after the trial. Others developed mysterious illness. Scariest of all, though, is the claims that some crew members had fused to the ship itself, skin and limbs fused to the bulkhead. One crew member in particular, Al Bielek, claims to have first-hand experience with the Eldridge, where he insists the experiment was a success, and when the Eldridge vanished, it reappeared in the year 2137. Bielek made a litany of claims about his visions of the future, claiming he saw a utopian vision of the future where the world was run on an AI that had eliminated all of the world's problems and conflicts. Officially, the US government has outright denied everything regarding the Philadelphia experiment and has ignored all of Bielek's claims altogether. But of course they would, okay? They're not gonna throw their hands up, lay their cards on the table, and be like, oh yeah, we've got time travel, we've been traveling time since the 40s, we've been experimenting with it ever since, you caught us. No, they're gonna keep it under wraps until they're ready, and they'll probably reveal it about 40 years ago.